But yeah, I'll just let people kind of join as we're going along and just kind of keep an eye on things. But yeah, thank you all for coming to the event. I think it's going to be a really good one. It is, as mentioned earlier, a virtual roundtable. So that kind of style is where we have a topic and kind of share it around. So like somebody's expertise. So Rusty will be talking about influential leadership and how to use that to drive a positive culture. And we'll just kind of, say a few things that might resonate with you, and then, kind of ask a few questions. And if you want to participate, that's completely up to you. If not, it's fine as well. But it's highly encouraged because, I think it will resonate a lot with you. Definitely resonates with me. And I'll personally have a lot to say. So, yeah, I'll hand it over to Rusty and he can talk a little bit about himself and then also just go ahead with the discussion. Is that right, Rusty?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And I'm sure we'll have some folks join us while we're in progress. I'll start just by a quick introduction. By trade, I'm a technology leader. I've been leading technical operations teams for tons of different verticals. And I don't know if all of the verticals, but boy, a lot of the verticals for, let's just say, more than 20 years to keep the specific number of years I've been doing it a little more of a secret. But I've been doing this for a long time, and while I'm a technology leader, it's leadership first. It happens to be in the technology space, but I have a point of view that the leadership is a responsibility, and that responsibility is to the folks, and whether those folks are geeks like I like to hang out with, or financial folks or sales folks. The leader has a responsibility, and so that's. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of coaching. I do a lot of conversations and speaking engagements like this about leadership and about culture and about diversity, equity, inclusion. They tend to sometimes focus around technology because that's where I am, but really, like I said, it's about the folks. And so when Jordan reached out to me about this event, I knew I had to jump in. First of all, I love the virtual roundtable format. That's not me talking for an hour, but rather me bringing up a couple of thoughts and ideas and then getting your reaction and response to it. I think collectively our experience is way more valuable than my experience. And so that's what I hope to pull from you all during the next little while. And so I'll start maybe I'll do a little bit of the world according to Rusty as it relates to culture and get you guys to react to some things I've got to say. And then we'll just kind of take it where it goes. So what do I say about culture? I say that culture is a misunderstood, super important, misunderstood, and misapplied word in the corporate world. Every company has what I come to refer to as an aspirational culture. That the aspirational culture is the thing that we talk about as companies. It's members of the group, whether it's a team or an organization. They talk about the things they believe in, and they talk about the behaviors that they think are desirable, and they articulate the actions that they'll tolerate and that they won't tolerate. Collectively, the things that we talk about in that nature become our aspirational culture. And it's real vogue to then take those aspirational cultures and document them in shared values. So we stand up and we're very proud of the work we've done to articulate all the things that are important to us. And this aspirational culture, these shared values are important, right? Because they document the best version of us as an organization. And they're helpful for new employees or would-be employees to know at least what does the company think is important. But these aspirational cultures, this value statement is not the culture of the company. Right? The culture of the company, the actual culture of the company is determined through our actions, the things we do, less than the things we say. In a perfect world, they would match, right? The things we say that are important to us and the actions that we take would be in alignment. But mine's not a perfect world. I don't know if you all live in a perfect world, but here in Keller, Texas, it's not a perfect world. And the things we wish were true are not often true. And that's a terrible way to say it. They're not always true. We might say that we stick with technology for a minute. We might say as a company, we value innovation. And part of our culture is to be an innovative culture. and yet we load our teams down with 50, 60 hours a week worth of work, and there's no time to experiment, and there's no time for prototyping, then our actions say that we're not actually interested in innovation. We're interested in productivity. You know, when a leader repeatedly acts contrary to the values they state are important, a gap begins. And if those contrary actions are left uncorrected, that gap will grow. Here's the thing that happens, though. You know, it's bad whenever a leader acts in contrary to their stated behaviors or their aspirational goals. But as they continue to work in opposition to their stated goals, this gap grows and grows and grows. And if it's not corrected, it's not just the culture that is at risk. And by the way, the culture is at risk, but the shared values, they start becoming nothing more than a punchline to a joke, right? Oh yeah, we care about innovation. That's why we work until 9 o'clock every night on the productivity things. Make no mistake, the enduring culture of an organization is not determined by the well-crafted, beautifully articulated organizational value statement that hits the front page of your website. The enduring culture of an organization is determined by the actions of its leaders and its members. All right, so that's my preamble. That is culture according to Rusty. Let's open this up for some cooperation here, some content from you all. Have you seen this sort of mismatch? This sort of mismatch between aspirational and actual culture of the company?
I see it from a recruiting standpoint, as far as a lot of times people, even, you'll go to some websites, not all of them, but you'll go to some websites and culture is defined by things. So like, oh, we have company happy hours and we have, oh, we have a ball pit or whatever. Okay, I'm being obnoxious there, but, a ball pit's not going to make you enjoy working with your coworkers anymore, right? And so a lot of times culture is spun as more of things and not things like what they should be, as far as like career growth and having, working around people that you feel like you truly have an opinion, and your opinion matters, So feeling
you'd like to believe
included.
that the culture of a company is free lunches and ping pong tables. That's culture.
Right.
That's not culture. It's
not culture. No. So
there you go. The office near me has a slide to get down the stairs. That's culture. There's nothing wrong with those things,
right?
Look, there's nothing wrong with those things, right? Unless they distract us from the work to actually bring, a quality culture. That would be like me saying, look, my family values are super important to me, which is why I want to make sure my kids have nice cars and we eat fancy meals. That's asinine, right? That's not family culture, and family values no more than ping pong tables and slides or company culture. So I think, I think this mismatch is something that we've probably seen. Yeah, Jamie. Oh, Jordan, you got to unmute him.
Oh,
I thought I was clapping, but I did have a point to raise on that as well. Is I think sometimes it is a bit where you do veer from your aspirations and culture, but if you acknowledge it, you might, and then you can own it and put it right, because there's this sort of thing where it's almost feel, there are times where it becomes impossible, but I find that it is acceptable if you go, look, this isn't our culture, but in this situation where it's something we're just going to have to take on the chin, we'll rectify it later. And if you take that ownership, you're then not having that sort of almost acting as though everything's nice and shiny and perfect. Because I think that's the bit, is that sometimes when you say there's that mismatch, it's because you see the difference, but you don't want to acknowledge it, so you can't reconcile it.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, that's a perfect transition into some of the. In fact, I'll skip a couple of my questions because your transition was better than mine. That wasn't good.
Kevin as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin. Before I move on, yeah, please.
Yeah, I wanted to double down on what Jamie said and go a little bit further with what I find, and I'm not taking a jab at the corporate world, but if it exists anywhere, it's in the corporate world, more than I've seen it anywhere else. And I think what it comes down to is your leadership group. They reach a point where most of the people that are providing a negative culture, they're performing. So what a lot of leadership groups, they exchange a healthy culture for results. And I've seen it time and time again where, you know, some of the people that might be the most toxic are pumping out the best numbers, and that's why they stick around. And but what there is no KPI for an entire department turning over in 4 years, you know, just because that one person is unbearable to work with or is ruining the culture. So I think as a leadership group of the organization, you have to draw a line in the sand and decide, do you really want it to be about the culture, or are we strictly going to care about KPIs?
Oh man, there's a lot of good stuff in what you just said there.
Yeah.
We'll pick at it for a second. Did you have something you wanted to share?
No,
Okay. Yeah. So
agree, Rusty. Agree, Kevin. I think in terms of cultural change, can you hear me all right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, I completely agree. I think in terms of driving cultural change, there is always a mismatch sometimes, right? Not always, but sometimes, between what you are trying to accomplish as your mission, vision for the company, what the strategy is, and what the culture is. I think the culture, I completely agree, is driven by behaviors rather than what you say or what your vision statement is or what your strategy is, etc. Right? So in my mind, if you want to drive a cultural change, what has helped me in the past is really looking at early adopters, people who will move, who will change, who will adopt a new way of working, and really start working with small set of early adopters, right, to drive that culture.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Losing you there at the end.
Change rather than Kevin, making a lot of speeches and a lot of presentations.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So Kevin, you picked up on you started an important topic. This, I call it aspirational culture because there's an important thing to aspire to something that you're not, right? Aspirational culture, if not acknowledged, it just becomes a water cooler joke. But I mean, look, we're at the 5th day of January. How many of us set goals? Let me be more specific. How many of us set fitness goals? How many of us said that they would like to run a mile in less than X minutes, or would like to lose X number of pounds? These are aspirations. Having aspirations, having an aspirational goal is super healthy, super healthy. But what happens at the end of February when you keep talking about how you're going to get to the gym and you still haven't done anything, right? It becomes a joke that we all have. Everybody knows that it's a joke at the beginning of January. Oh, what's your resolution this year? How many pounds that you didn't lose last year, you're going to lose this year. And if it's in an individual, maybe we can laugh about it. But when it's in a corporation, it becomes something we ought to do something about it, is the point, right? So where do when we find ourselves in that place where the aspirational goals or the aspirational values are not being represented in action, Kevin, you're right on. It's not the end of the world. It's time to acknowledge it and take steps. And so actually, let's move on to the next point, the next section here, because this wasn't about let's commiserate on how bad culture is, but rather what can we do about it, right? Now, I wish Sakin was still with us because I think his point. Oh, he is. Okay, you're good. So we're gonna talk now through leadership and what leadership, the influence that leaders have. Every leader, a leader of, a peer leader on a small team, an organizational manager of a small team, a CEO of a company. Every leader, every person who's in position to influence will influence. Make sure you don't think that I misspoke. If you're in a position where you can have influence on others, you will have influence on others. Let's make it simple, and let's say a manager of a team exerts influence on that team. It's not just in the actions that you ask of your individuals that report into your structure. It's in the way you act as a leader. It's in the behaviors that you exhibit. It's in the things you're passionate about. It's in your pet peeves, the things that make you crazy. It's in your strengths. It's in your blind spots that you're not even aware of. All of these things have influence on the people in your team. And those influences, some of them are harmful. Some of them are helpful. Some of them are harmful. Some of them are uplifting. Some of them are destructive. Some are positive, some are negative. And that leader exerts that force, even if they're unaware of it. There is such thing as passive influence. And over time, this influence, that whether it's passive or whether it's active, this influence will change teams, will change organizations, and will change people. Over time, the individuals that are being influenced tend to adopt the behaviors that they're seeing from their leadership. Over time, a team will start focusing on the things that are important to the leader and will start neglecting the things that aren't important to the leader. Kevin, you said earlier that toxic behavior on high performers is generally tolerated. If the leader of that group shows that the toxicity is secondarily important to the performance, then you're absolutely right, that nothing will be done. Whereas if you find, and you can see this, I'm a sports fan, I don't know if all y'all are sports fans, but you can see this in sports a lot of times. You'll see that superstar sports, that superstar athlete who is just a toxic teammate. And even while he may be crushing it in their sport, they find themselves going from team to team because there are some leaders who won't tolerate that toxicity. In a team environment, a sports team environment, it's sometimes easier to see, Kevin, than maybe it is from the outside when it's the top sales performer who gets to do whatever she wants to do, whatever he wants to do, and it's tolerated because of the productivity. But I'm telling you that that's happening because the leader is allowing it. And because the leader allows it, the organization allows it, right? And so that's the influence of the leader showing itself in the organization. Over time, given enough time, the culture of an organization will resemble the personality and character of its primary leaders. It's unavoidable. Where a leader shows empathy and kindness and values inclusivity, you'll find a team that operates in a similar manner. But show me a leader who's self-serving, is short-tempered, prone to chastise individuals publicly, and you're going to find a team that won't act, that is allergic to change, that will not share their opinions openly. They will not take risks because they will have been taught that those things are punished. So there's a term that was coined in the 70s and late 70s called shadow of a leader. And a shadow of a leader is this phenomenon that I'm talking about, that the organization and a team will take on behaviors and characteristics of its leader over time. So let me ask you, have you seen this shadow of a leader phenomenon play out where you've worked? Kevin, you talked about it where you've worked in the past. Has anybody else seen an organization, a team, take on the characteristics that are modeled by its leader? Whether good or bad, I'd love to hear both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I just took over a marina for a general manager that was very much the opposite of me. And when I got his full team, it was as if he was still here for 6 or 8 months after.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes to break the shadow of the former leader, you got to build a trust that didn't exist the day you got there, especially if the environment you took over was from an untrustworthy former leader. Jamie, you had something?
Yeah, so 2 examples. It's going to be a bit of a humble brag here, but in a place I was working previously, one of the departments in our directorate, very much their head of department was very much, I work by a checklist. I have no concept of what I'm talking about. I just go by my checklist, and I'm not veering with my checklist. If my checklist says grass is purple, it's purple. And it was that stuck to it, and that cascaded down in his teams. When you're bringing in new tech, that's his checklist worked for all tech, not new tech. But his whole department could not veer from his leadership on that side. There's a checklist, we go by it. I think on the flip side, I'd built a team up, and I was very aware that not so much working long hours, but sometimes we'd work late because you're in the middle of a problem and you don't want to get distracted and break off. So I was very clear with that. If you work late, you take the time back. You put yourself out of office. You just let someone know. So if there is an emergency, you can get hold of you. And that was so sometimes I would take time off and I wouldn't do anything and just play with the dog. But it was about making so it was visible that people would know I'd worked late the night before, but they'd know that I'm taking 2 hours back to get that healthy balance. So that was, as I say, 2 contrasting examples in the same place.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Kevin.
How about you go? Kevin?
Kevin?
Yeah, sorry, somebody else's.
Oh, sorry, I just muted you, Kevin. I didn't move.
Oh, you're fine.
Go,
Yeah,
Kevin.
so I've had a unique background with, I've worked with a lot of consulting companies. So like I'll come into a lot of different type of organizations, and for me, it's been I feel like you can typically tell from how the company represents themselves in the interview process if culture is important to them or not. Because all the places I've been have stressed culture from day one, from the first employee I've met to the last employee I've met. They've made it a point that it's known that this is very important to us. This is something that's on our radar. If you don't fit in this culture, then you're out. It doesn't matter what you bring to the table because it jeopardizes us as an organization. And then on the flip side, you go to, organization B, and they don't even, you could go up to any employee and ask them what their company values are, and nobody could tell you a single one of them. So I think that, like, if you are, and I'm not trying to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but like, I think it starts from day one with the very first people that represent the organization. Like, they need to set the precedent and the expectation that this is the tone, and if you don't like it, don't join.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. I mean, I've seen a lot from, working with startups and bigger companies as well, that startup mentality. You have to go from the foundations. The foundation has to be solid, and you have to be consistent with implementing those values and acting on them, like Rusty said. Completely agree, Kevin. Mo as well.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I wanted to share a couple of things, going back to Rusty, what you mentioned about emulating and trying to I think, subconsciously mimic the characteristics of my leader. And I think a couple of things, pros and cons.
Sorry, can I interrupt, Erasmo,
Sure.
Before you move on? I just want to be clear. I wasn't advocating for trying to emulate your leader. What I'm saying is left to normal human nature, in time, organizations will emulate their leader.
Yeah,
even if we don't do so intentionally, just because of what is rewarded and what is recognized and what is expected, we tend to, the people who aren't emulating, they leave.
Yeah.
And the people who stay, they emulate. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think you what you described is sort of what happened to me. I went through, I think, good traits of a leader where I saw that he was very active and wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and do, the dirty work. He wasn't just there to look pretty and give orders, but he was also there to, take away the trash, clean the refrigerator. And I admired that type of like servant leadership. And I wanted to emulate that. It kind of resonated with my way of being. But as I think time progressed, stress progressed, I think good leadership and good people, with like top down culture can change a person. And then all of a sudden, I like to say that I tend to treat people nicely, and I like to consider myself a nice guy. And when somebody says you were mean, like I kind of take it to heart. But my leader was somebody who was very aggressive in across like the culture of the company, and I didn't realize it, but then I started to act that way. And there were moments in my drive home that I was like, man, I was really rude to this guy today. And I started to feel like I don't want to be part of that culture. And I actually had to make a personal decision where I was like, can you change this culture, or are you going to let it change you? And I made like a very personal choice, difficult choice, to say I'm going to stay away from that culture.
Come on.
But it's like nailing it right on what you just mentioned.
Awesome. We're going to talk about that in depth here in the next section. Amber, I wanted to ask you a question of what you talked about working in Marina, where you took over from a leader who had a different leadership style than you did. I'll just characterize it that way. Am I reading between the lines properly in hearing that the outgoing leader had a toxic nature?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So my question was, have you ever seen a new leader, a new positive leader, turn around a toxic team? And so we have in our midst evidence that this can happen. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it actually is exactly what you're talking about. It just became just coming into myself and saying every day I'm going to go to work with the positive attitude and kind of show what we should be acting like towards each other, towards our guests, towards all of it. And it did. It turned it around. And the people that had emulated the former leader actually decided to, leave, which was fantastic because it was an instant culture shift. I mean, it was a 24-hour culture shift.
Yeah, I mean, you can have addition by subtraction, can't you?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So this we're at halfway. So I want to get through this next section so we can get into some specific actionable things that you can take away. As we talked about before, every leader has influence, and where a leader is not intentional with their actions and their behaviors, the outcome's unpredictable. Right? Knowing that I have influence, but not being aware of the actions I'm taking to leverage or to utilize that influence, the outcomes, I'm not going to know what the outcomes are. But a prudent leader will recognize that they have influence, and then they'll ask themselves, how am I going to use this? What is the best, most responsible way for me to utilize this influence I have? And if and when the leader does that, and they're intentional with their actions. For instance, Kevin, if I were in your organization and there was a toxic, high-performing worker that was causing what, by the way, you talked about a KPI about turnover in a company. I track a KPI all the time called regrettable loss. And this is when somebody left my team and I wish they hadn't. Because if we're being good leaders, people are going to leave your teams. If they're not meeting the standard, if they're not pulling their weight, if they're not taking instruction and learning continually, they're breaking the rules, they're going to leave. Those are the ones we worry about. The ones we worry about are regrettable ones. The ones where if Bob wasn't such a jerk, I'd still be here, right? So there is a KPI, regrettable loss. I'd recommend it be something that everybody think about. But if I were taking over that team and Bob was a jerk, I would be intentional with my behaviors so that Bob would see me acting contrary to him around everybody. Bob would see that when I saw him act like a jerk, I corrected him. And I would set up a situation where, and why would I do this, Kevin? Because I know that I can find good humans who perform well, not just jerk humans who perform well. And so would I lose in the short term? I might lose in the short term, but what I can tell you is that the entire team's, what's the phrase that rising tide lifts all ships? Improve the environment of that team and everybody on the team improves a little bit. And the collective improvement from a lot of people oftentimes will make up for the loss of that high performer. And besides, for me personally, this is just the world according to Rusty. I don't want to be part of a team that's crushing it and being jerks. I just don't. I'd rather move on and be a part of a different team. Anyway, so the point there is if we're intentional with our actions, we can have predictable outcomes, right? So the prudent leader says, what do I need to do to change toxic to caring? What do I need to do to help employee Sally improve her performance? Or how do I get my team to recognize that I am to be trusted and I trust you? What things can we do? The heart of all of this is trust. How can I get Carrie to trust me if she doesn't trust me because I'm the new guy? There are intentional actions we can take. It's been said, I'd like to know if you all have heard this saying before, that the culture of an organization is shaped by the worst behavior its leaders will tolerate. Have you heard that before? That's an old saying. It's been around for quite some time. I'd argue there's a possible corollary to that, and that's that the culture of the organization is also shaped by the behaviors its leaders model, reward, and encourage. So yeah, if I do terrible things, I'm getting an organization who has a culture that accepts terrible things. But if I do great things, if I have good behaviors, if I have trustworthy actions, and I reward those same, then the organization will trend that way. So I'm going to pause a second before we get into what can we do specifically to kind of get your thoughts on this notion that if I'm intentional with my actions and my behaviors, I can have a more predictable outcome on the culture of my organization.
Anyone got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe it was one of those things, Rusty, that was so elementary. Of course, we all knew that before you said it, so we'll move on. Did I see WB? Was that
WB?
I mean, I can mention something real quick. I think it's something that as a leader, if you don't realize that you make a face or you make a grunting noise when you're hearing bad news and you're portraying that you're upset, then even if I verbally say I'd like to hear bad news quick, it's going to put your employees in a situation where you're like, I don't think he really means that. And I think, this happened to me when somebody's like, were you having a bad day? And I was like, no, I was just hungry. And I realized that I would turn hangry. And I didn't know it, but I was kind of portraying something, and, it was causing inadvertently, but it was leading somebody towards a behavior where I'm like, why didn't you tell me, we had this issue going on? So I could totally see that. I mean, you put it eloquently in a way that it was like, no wonder, like I had to make that adjustment, but I wasn't, I think, consciously aware of, when I do this, subconsciously, it's kind of leading into the incorrect reaction, and I've been a little bit cautious about even something simple, like when to say a bad word, like just to try to get a little bit of a fire in people. Not that I'm upset, but I've strategically throw in like a shade or something like that. So I've been
intentionality, right?
Yeah. So that's something where I've been intentional about it when they're like, oh, Mo doesn't curse. And now he said, shit, so you must be upset. So I've been intentional about doing something like that, but in a controlled fashion where I was strategic about it. And there's been other instances where I've, been unintentional about it and then started to see sort of like a deviating effect that I didn't really quite want.
Yeah, Jamie, you had your hand up for a second.
Yeah, I think one thing I think where I was doing is, again, with the previous company, was working on doing a lot around mental health support and issues. And I was keen that it wasn't just seen as a tick box exercise. So they did bring in sort of like coffee mornings every few weeks as like a mental health free-for-all. Mental health free-for-all? I don't think that's right. But, so a few people it was chaired by like a director, and a few people sharing. And, and I decided to share about some of my background, my experience and stuff. And it was really strange because I just felt I was just chatting normally. But in retrospect, I was like by far the most senior person who was talking on it. At the time, I got very little response, but I got a number of emails after, and months after, it was getting people from different teams sort of going, it was really great hearing you talk, because now I know it's not just a tick box exercise. What you were talking about means you actually care, you get it, sort of thing. And it's, when you're having these sort of initiatives, it's about, participating in them to say they are genuine initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. Yeah, so with the last 20-ish minutes, what I want to do is I'm going to talk through things that we can do intentionally. We have to think about these because they're going to be behavioral changes and action changes. Perhaps, maybe you're already doing them, and again, this would be just a refresher, but if and when we do these things, they'll have a positive impact on culture. Why will they have a positive impact? Because we have established that culture is driven by action, not words, that leaders have influence, ergo their actions will influence others. And if we can be intentional about our actions, we can have predictable outcomes. And so let's be intentional. What can we talk about? So I'm a geek. I've always been a geek. So we have the triad of people, process, and technology that is tried and true. It will always be a thing. So let's start with process. We'll start with people, rather. Let's start with people. What things can we do with and for our people that will positively impact culture? I will start with communication, because it's an area where, ironically, I don't excel. I mean, I speak and I get up in front of people and I do all these things, but when it comes to organizational communication, I convince myself that I'm over communicating and I'm not. There is no such thing as over communication. Write that down, underline it, put in bold font. You cannot over communicate. Over communication, simply not a thing. You can be intentional with various formats, various frequencies, change the message to get the same outcome. I'm going to hear from message A something different than Jordan heard from the same message. If you send it to me in email, there's a good chance I'm never going to see it. If you send it to me on a Slack, I'll probably see it within minutes of when you sent it. If you send it to me in a video, I'm more likely than on page 4 of a giant, giant article. There are different ways to communicate, and communication works differently for different people. Here's a truth about communication that is undeniable. In communication, there are 3 roles. There are 3 items that are important. The communicator, the sender, that's me. The receiver, that's you, Anna, and the message. It's my responsibility as a sender to make sure you receive the message I thought I sent you. It's my responsibility, not yours. If we can think about these things, various format, various frequency, that is my responsibility as a sender to make sure the message was received as intended, and I can't over communicate. If we can model those 3 things in the way we communicate with our teams, the impact on culture will be huge. So let's pause for a second. I've got a list of these, more than we can cover in 20 minutes, but we'll hang out here in a second. Thoughts about communication. Do you believe communication, over communication is a thing? Anybody? No.
But I also think, when you said it was, but you and the recipient, and then what the actual communication's about, I think that's really important, because I think there's a way to still keep people feeling like they're included, and they're heard. And it all goes back to being heard, being part of a team, being included. And so, say somebody, okay, I don't know, I'm not creative, but okay, somebody makes a huge oops, instead of going, Rusty, you dumbass, why did you screw this up? Why did you do this? Like, coming from a different way of, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How can I help you? What can I do to help remedy this? And so it's like, it's not just, oh, Rusty, you really screwed up this time, but it's like, I'm here, we're on the same team. Like, what can we do to get this resolved? How can I help? Yeah. So just little things like that, I think, make a big difference in communication.
Yeah, even if we're just talking about normal organizational stuff that happens, you acquire a company, and the CEO stands up in front of the company with the CEO of the acquired company and talks about all the great things we're going to do and how we're going to integrate the company. And me as a CIO, I'm in the conversations, right? So I know, I've been there, I'm helping make the sausage. And the CIO stood up, and the CEO stood up, and then I get my full team together and I echo the message, and I'm done, right? I've communicated it, the CEO's communicated it. To over communicate. No, it's not. Because the frontline employee who heard me talk about it for 7 or 8 minutes and wasn't in hours and hours and hours of integration meetings has a shallow understanding of the thing that I think is obvious. You got to be willing to just keep going at it. You can't over communicate.
Absolutely agree, Rusty. I just had to make point to make, Sachin here. So absolutely, I think especially when you talk about integration, mergers and acquisitions, of course, this problem becomes even more serious, right? Because people come from different cultures, people come from different identities, people have identified themselves with certain brand names and companies. And when companies are coming together, cultures are coming together, to our point. I mean, the whole conversation today is really about cultures. and there isn't one culture, right, when that happens. So that is a very interesting aspect. I think it's a, you really live, in my experience, you live that on an hourly basis, daily basis, to ensure that people are on board, people are integrated, people feel at home. I don't think it's about, I completely agree. It's not about one meeting. It's not about one address or one speech. I think it's about your actions, right, on a daily basis, really.
Well, and willingness to mix it up. Look, if my preferred method of communication is this, is a conversation, all hands meeting. That's not everybody's preferred method, right? Bob might be multitasking, trying to get his work done and not listen to that knucklehead Rusty talking again. Well, he didn't hear anything I said.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely didn't communicate to him, right? So in the interest of covering some ground here, let's move on to something I think is super important, and that's recognitions. Why do we recognize outcomes and effort? Not rhetorical. We recognize outcomes and effort because we should. Let me fix that. We should recognize efforts and outcomes because those are the efforts and outcomes we want others to emulate. We have identified these outcomes and efforts as the things we want all of our employees to do. So when we see these efforts and outcomes, we talk about them so that other people will see, okay, that's what I need to do. Let's go ahead and maybe it'll motivate me to do something else. So if I see an outcome or a behavior that I want others to follow, I should be recognizing it. So use that as a slight tweak to the way you think about recognitions. Recognitions is not the all company quarterly recognition where one or two employees or teams in the entire company are recognized in an all hands meeting. And for those one or two people, they get some cool gift and they get to be famous for a minute. And then we move on to the next quarter. That's not effective recognition. Effective recognition should be frequent. It should be routine, and it should be from all levels of leadership. So I'll just give you a practical example of how I implement this. With my staff meeting, I meet with my direct reports and my staff each week. And each week we talk about a handful of routine things. Vacation and PTO schedule and travel schedules. We make sure we all know where we are because we're global. We talk about hiring because hiring is super important. If you give me an open headcount, I'm gonna get that person hired because my team needs the help. We talk about highlights and lowlights. We talk about progress on the annual and quarterly goals. But every single week, we stop and we talk about recognitions. Since we met last week, who did you see crushing it? Who did a great job? Not who worked until midnight to fix a fire that they started in the first place, but who did something that was awesome, that we want others to emulate. And you do it every single week. And as a leader of the group, when one of my subordinate leaders tells me, look, Sally and Jim, they did such and such to teach this new employee something, and the way they did it was super inclusive and yada, yada, yada. At that very moment, I open up Slack and I send Sally and Jim. Are those the fake names I use? I send Sally and Jim. At that very moment, I send them a message saying, hey, I heard what you did. And a lot of times I'll play with them a little bit and they're like, oh crap, was Rusty here? And I'll just go back and forth a little bit so they know, look, we talk about it, we saw what you did and I appreciate it. Do it right then and there, frequent. Then what else do? You take those weeklies and each month or each quarter, we did it each quarter, you roll it up and have a quarterly department recognition. You don't have to get permission for this. You can have a team of 2 or 3 people. You do not have to get permission for monthly talking about which one of them crushed it the most. You can do that. That's your prerogative as a leader. So we stood up what I called, remember, we're technical operations. So I was very clever with the name of my award. I called it the Smooth Operator Award. And so each quarter we had a Smooth Operator Award. So one more point about recognition before I ask for your feedback on this is I beg you, do not just recognize superheroes. You know, the people who worked all the late hours to put out the fire. That is not the only behavior we want people to emulate. We want people to emulate the behavior of inclusivity. We want, where we can see high character actions, we want people to emulate that. We want people who communicate well. We want people to emulate that. So I urge you to take those aspirational cultural values and make those some of the ways you recognize people. What we ended up doing is at the beginning of each quarter, we identified the trait that we would use to determine that quarter's smooth operator. So it wasn't always a superhero. So the day before we did the smooth operator award, somebody might have done the most amazing superheroic effort to get production systems back online. They're not going to win the smooth operator award if that quarter we were talking about inclusive. Instead, we find somebody who found a way to include actors who weren't typically included or weren't obviously included. Determine the behaviors and actions that you want people to emulate, and then at the beginning of each quarter, publicize. This is what we're looking for this quarter. You'll get so much mileage out of that, because what you'll have if you don't is the same 2 or 3 superheroes will win it every single quarter. And I urge you to think about this too. If the only behavior you are recognizing is putting out fires, you're encouraging more fires, because you can't be a superhero unless you put out a fire, right? Think about the other behaviors you'd like to see and include those in your recognition program. All right, so I'll pause on recognition for a second.
Yeah, so I have a comment on it. I actually learned that when leadership provides this sort of recognition to employees, and not employees to do that for themselves, is not very good practice, because this cultivates this perception of favorites. And a few companies I worked before, including Apple, changed this behavior for these recognitions to be given from people to people, not by leadership. And even more, it's actually not even endorsed that leaders from a mid or high level management would give those. It's more leaders would encourage, like engineering staff, for example, to give those kudos and recognition to each other, and identify the reasons why they give those recognitions. And that worked much better, and it's the same way in my current company, which is probably a smaller company, but it did not, it sort of, I guess, inherited that from a few previous leaders who worked for big FANG companies as well.
Yeah, Eugene, you got it right. I mean, there's a ton of value in peer recognition. I want to urge you not to be an either or, though. There is a ton of impact from hearing a senior level person on a Tuesday morning out of the blue send a Slack and say, "Man, I heard you did such a great job." If it gets to favoritism, Eugene, then this is again when we got to take a look at the influence of the leader and be intentional with your influence. Take actions that will result in the positive outcomes you're looking for. If I'm always sending Eugene a message 3 times a week, people are going to freaking hate Eugene, because the CIO only tells Eugene he did a great job, and I did a great job too. And why is Eugene? I mean, that's an outcome that you can prevent by being intentional with your actions. Leaders have influence, Eugene, and we should use that positively. Now, it's not solely, and when we get to technology, we're going to talk a little bit about facilitating the employee to employee peer recognitions. Man, that's powerful stuff. That's powerful stuff. So let's pause on that for a second. We'll get to that hopefully before this meeting's over. Any other conversations? Golly, we're out of time. I told you, Jordan. I told you we were going to run out of time.
It's all me.
Like, don't invite Carrie next time. She talks too much.
There you go. Just mute her. All right. So let me just whip through a couple of them. In fact, let me do this. Let me really quickly. I'm going to drop my. Okay, I'll just drop my LinkedIn profile in the chat. So if you want to talk about this, then drop me a message and we'll talk about it offline, because I want to get through a few other things. Again, the focus here is what can a leader do to have positive cultural change. I have recommended, will continue to recommend that leaders take on the responsibility for proactive outreach to everybody in their team. Whether your team is 3 or 303, you should find a way to reach out and have meaningful conversations, even if it's a message, an IM sort of instant message conversation with every person in your charge. It's with IM, it's super easy to do this. This is what I have personally done. I've run big organizations. I truly don't know everybody in the organization. I've not had a personal face-to-face conversation I wasn't involved in hiring them, and I don't manage them on a day-to-day basis. But it doesn't mean I don't care about them. It doesn't mean I don't want to hear from them. It doesn't mean I'm not responsible for helping remove obstacles that they're facing, things that cause them distress. And I'm responsible for removing those things and helping them achieve the things that make them happy. So how am I going to do that if I don't talk to them? So what I do is I get a roster of my employees, and I start at the top of the roster, and I go to each one of them on LinkedIn, on Slack, and I send a message. Hey, there's really no goal here other than to get to know you. This is Rusty. You probably heard my name before. We've never talked. What's going on in your life? You can have 2 of those going on at the same time, 3 of those going on at the same time. Take 30 minutes twice a week. You can knock out 15, 20 easily every week. And when you get to the bottom of the list, get a new list, start over at the top again. You get a new list because people got hired and people left the organization since your last list, so you need to get a new list. Start back at the top again, work through it. So it takes you 6 months. If you weren't doing it, how long would it take you to talk to 300 people? You'd never do it. So 6 months is far better than never. So that's a way. Proactive outreach is a practical way to get in front of those frontline employees and hear what they're working on. Build a rapport with them. The fascinating thing that happens is after you make that first contact, out of the blue one day, you'll get a message from one of them. Hey, I was thinking about what you said the other day, and I was thinking X, Y, Z. Encourage those types of behaviors, which leads me to the next section, and that's inclusion. I could talk an hour about inclusion, but this is how I summarize our focus on inclusion. Do not predetermine where good ideas come from. Good ideas can come from everywhere in the organization, from every religious and social economic background, from every race, from gender, from all sexual preferences. It doesn't matter. Good ideas can come from everywhere. So you should approach this as saying, I'm not going to predetermine where good ideas come from. I'm listening to all of the ideas. I'm making it an environment where everybody feels safe to share their points of view. You'll be shocked what happens when you prove that it's real. And I'll take a minute and talk about one of the ways that I have proven this out. Why do people sometimes not feel included? Sometimes they don't feel included because their organization's keeping them out, is excluding them. That's time for another TED Talk. But sometimes they don't feel included because they haven't felt safe to share their point of view. Who am I to share this point of view? He's the boss, he said that, and I'll just follow it. So I have done this. I started doing this with that McAfee back 15 years ago, and I still do it to this day. This is what happens. I've got an idea, something I want to discuss. I have a point of view. I'm going to call my senior staff together, and we're going to talk about that point of view. But I'm going to go into that meeting as the boss. And when I go into the meeting as the boss, there's this resistance to disagree. Even though I set myself up as a trusting guy who wants the inclusion or who wants the point of view, and I actually kind of crave that friction of the debate, it's still there's a resistance. So before the meeting, hey, Mike, we're going to meet in a minute. And when we do, I'm going to present a topic you've never heard. You need to disagree with me. And Mike's a trusted guy on my team who knows I'm going to do this. And Mike's like, I'm your man. And so sure enough, I'll start talking about this topic and I'll get through most of my material. And everybody around the table is doing this, agreeing with me. And then Mike says, but Rusty, when you say this, I think this, and this. And the most fascinating thing happens. As soon as Mike gets, contradicts or argues or disagrees with me, and he doesn't get attacked for it, everybody else around the table who was just doing this a moment ago starts saying, you know what, that's true. And I was also thinking this, and I was also thinking this. It's okay to set up a plant so that you can prove that I really mean it when I say I want your point of view. We can consider your suggestion unless you have defined the acceptance criteria and completed the cost benefits. Oh my gosh. That is a way to exclude people. I would say that that's a really good behavior to intentionally find ways to influence out of your organization. All right, so let's move a little bit further here, and we're out of time. What are we going to do, Jordan?
I think honestly we have to leave it there. I think we should definitely do a follow-up of this. You sent me over your list as well, and you have some more things to talk about.
So if I can, Jordan, in the interest of circling back to Eugene about the peer, recognition, there is a Slack app called Hey Taco. It's a cool little app. There's a little fee to it, but in essence, it facilitates employee to employee recognition in the forms of 2 tacos to Eugene today for doing such and such, or 1 taco to such. And so through Slack, you're giving the taco and you're describing why you gave the taco, and the app keeps track of the number of tacos each person has received. It's pretty cool. It's super lightweight, could be implemented in a week. And it could be implemented in a minute, but it could be operationalized in a week. And it really does a good job of facilitating what Eugene talked about being super important, doing that peer-to-peer recognition. It's called Hey Taco. All right, Jordan, I'm sorry. You're
That's fine. I was going to say, circle up anything. Has anyone got any last thoughts before we do kind of wrap this up? And like I said, Rusty, if you want to do another one, we can definitely have that discussion. And yeah, put in the chat as well your thoughts if you don't want to speak out loud. Has anyone got any finishing thoughts on everything that we talked about?
I'm in California, so we just got done with the bomb cyclone, and I almost did not come. I'm very glad that I signed on.
That's the craziest weather I've seen in my life, I think.
It's literally a hurricane on the West Coast. I don't know. I was shocked to see that I had a marina still. So no, I'm very glad. Thank you very much. I'm glad I took the time.
I hope you all will believe me when I say I want you to reach out if you've got a follow-up question, you'd like to see the rest of the list of things that you didn't get to see today. Just drop me a LinkedIn message. I'll get to it. And maybe a day or so, but I'll get to it, respond back to you. Love to carry this conversation out and help you with whatever questions or concerns you're dealing with in any way I can.
Yeah, definitely. And you've got your LinkedIn profile there in the chat if anyone wants to look at Rusty's profile. But it'll also be on my LinkedIn of the event. Just click on that. And then also, the Shadow of the Leader website as well. You can check that out. Really, really, important stuff. I think there's so many things we can talk about as well in terms of culture, and right at the start, I was holding back because I wanted to talk so much about I definitely see Shadow of the Leader. So I've got that lingering COVID cough, and how the team does, and I think even if they don't want to, they naturally do. Again, I could talk all day about that as well. Yeah, you put that in there again. Yeah, that would absolutely be awesome. So yeah, I'd love to talk more about it. Awesome. Yeah, we'll wrap that up. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks. Very informative. Thank you.